The Philadelphia Eagles head into another game against a team with the season slipping away. The Cowboys are down their starting quarterback, and there's turmoil on the defensive side of the ball, while the Eagles continue to dominate on both offense and defense. Welcome to the Philly Film Room Podcast. I'm Nick Waters, and today we are going to be discussing everything Cowboys and Eagles. I think this is a game that most Eagles fans assume that the team will win decidedly, but let's take a look at what the Cowboys bring to the table to see what they need to do to make sure that happens. Considering that the Cowboys are down their starting quarterback, let's first look at this offense. Looking at the Cowboys offense, it is led by head coach Mike McCarthy, with Brian Schottenheimer as the offensive coordinator. Dak Prescott is out with injury, so backup Cooper Rush steps in, and the offense is headlined by names like CeeDee Lamb, and well, that's really it, although I would say Tyler Smith is one of the best guards in the NFL, though people don't really seem to care much about guards. When you look at where they're ranked, they're 20th in points per game, 15th in yards per game, 22nd in yards per play, and 23rd in EPA per play, and that was with Dak at quarterback. So what can we expect from this offense with Cooper Rush at quarterback? Well, some things aren't going to change. This offense runs through CeeDee Lamb. When you look at the lack of wide receiver talent behind CeeDee Lamb, well, it's clear why they give him the ball so much, especially with Brandon Cooks out with injury. I know there's a number of Cowboy fans that have been somewhat underwhelmed by his production since coming to the team, but with him out of the lineup, it really puts a spotlight on the rest of the unit and their lack of talent overall. The coaches know this as well since they've come out of the bye week targeting CeeDee Lamb at a much higher rate, right? So taking away CeeDee Lamb is a must for this defense. Looking at the rest of this offense, though, this run game has really struggled to get going. They're last or close to last in almost every major statistical category. But I will say a big part of that is due to probably playing Zeke too much. And I would have to say that a lot of that has to come down to Jerry Jones meddling. You can tell he has a lot of admiration for Zeke and he wants Zeke to have his time. But listen, the NFL is a young man's league. And Rico Dowdle just has more explosiveness and more juice to his game right now. And that carries over in the passing game as well. And when you listen to Mike McCarthy talk recently, you can tell that he knows it's time to give Rico Dowdle more work and take away a lot of those snaps from Zeke. You can see this in the numbers as well. It shows up in a big way in their yards before contact. Oftentimes, people think that reflects back to the offensive line, and it does to a degree, but the relationship between offensive line and running back is almost indistinguishable, right? So when you look at Rico Dowdle and his yards before contact, and I should preface this, the grading services rank yards before contact and yards after contact much differently. So I'm going to give 3 different services and their yards before contact numbers. PFF has Rico Dowdle at 1.7 yards before contact. Next Gen Stats has him at 1.5 yards before contact. Sports Info Solutions has him at 2.1 yards before contact. Now, Zeke is at 0.4 yards by PFF, 0.5 yards by Next Gen Stats, and 0.8 yards before contact, according to Sports Info Solutions. So any service that you look at, it's clear that Dowdle is bringing something to this offense that Zeke just can't right now. And it's really coaching malpractice not to have him as a featured back based on who they have on their roster. So I don't expect the Cowboys will find much success against the Eagles on the ground, especially since the bye week. The Eagles' run defense is first in yards per game and second in yards per attempt. So I don't think the Cowboys are going to find much success on the ground in this game. And that's not going to be too good when you're dealing with the fact that you're playing with a backup quarterback. Now, it is kind of hard to project what we will see on offense on Sunday. Cooper Rush came into the game against the Falcons in the fourth quarter, down 27-13. So you really saw the Cowboys get into much more of a drop back passing attack, a shotgun passing attack. I expect we'll see, at least early in the game against the Eagles, or as long as they're able to keep it close, I expect we'll see an increased usage of under center and heavy personnel. They will use a fullback. They'll use play action and rollouts to move the pocket and create easy throws. I also expect a fair number of gadget plays, whether that's screens, jet sweeps, end arounds, just a number of different things to kind of help keep their offense on schedule because they will throw a lot of incompletions on their own, right? So, and especially with Cooper Rush at quarterback. So looking at some of the offensive matchups and looking at Cooper Rush, he's second in the NFL this season in time to throw. And I had to bump the qualifying numbers down so that he qualified, but he's second in the NFL in time to throw this season. He was also second in 2022 when he played 8 total games. I think he had 4 or 5 starts that season with Dak dealing with injury. And even though he is quick getting the ball out of his hands, he is still 43rd out of 44 qualifying quarterbacks in completion percentage and adjusted completion percentage. Looking back to 2022, he was 38 and 37 out of the 41 qualifying quarterbacks, respectively, while also being 38th in turnover-worthy throw percentage in 2022 as well. So he will get the ball out of his hands quickly. Sometimes he puts it in harm's way, though. He'll also get happy feet in the pocket and scramble unnecessarily at times. That can lead to major inaccuracies because he doesn't have a solid, consistent throwing platform to throw from when he does get a little get those happy feet. But I'll say this about Cooper Rush. He diagnoses and gets through his reads quickly, though he doesn't always throw it on target. There's several instances on film of him playing with very good pocket presence. He's probably a little bit better than public perception as a backup quarterback, but this Eagles defense is red hot, and the Cowboys have other issues to overcome. So I'm not sure if Cooper Rush is going to be the guy to come in here and take advantage of this Eagles defense. They will likely get down to the Eagles and have to be forced into a drop back passing attack. I expect things to fall apart the longer and longer that Cooper Rush is asked to do that. But if the Eagles let the Cowboys hang around, I think they could make this a little bit closer game than people expect. If you go back to that 2022 start that Cooper Rush had against the Eagles, they actually outscored the Eagles in the second half. And through the entirety of the game, they averaged more yards per play. It's just that the Eagles won the turnover battle 3-0. And I'm pretty sure all three of those turnovers came in the first half. So it was a bit of a mirage with the Eagles beating the Cowboys by more than one score in their 2022 matchup against Cooper Rush. Now, looking at CeeDee Lamb, we touched on him a little bit. He is a true number one. He can line up anywhere. He's an excellent route runner. He's a yak king. Get him the ball in space, and he's going to make guys miss. He's a tough and physical runner as well. They'll also give him the ball on jet sweeps and end arounds. They try to manufacture ways to get CeeDee Lamb the ball. Like I said, the Eagles must take him away. Now, he's not the fastest wide receiver in the world, and with the DBs we have, I wouldn't be scared to get up and press. They have the recovery speed to catch back up if they are beat early. But by playing man coverage and getting up in people's faces, I think we're anticipating that Cooper Rush is going to try and get the ball out of his hands quick. The Eagles should be working to take that away. Now, looking at who is going to be blocking Jalen Carter, and this week it is maybe Zach Martin, who has been one of the best guards in the NFL for quite some time, although I will say that it seems like he is having probably the worst year of his career, or at least since his early days. But he missed Wednesday and Thursday of practice, still waiting for the practice report as of this recording for Friday to see if he is going to play. But if he doesn't play, TJ Bass will probably step in and fill in for Zach Martin. Either way, like I said, either way right now, I think this is a plus matchup for Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter still got, I think it was 5 pressures and a sack playing against this Cowboys team last year when Zach Martin was better. And he was also going against Tyler Smith, rotating on defensive tackle spots, and he was able to get pressure against both of those guys. Either way, right now, this is probably a plus matchup for Jalen Carter. Zach Martin is just not playing to the level that we have seen in the past. So this is an opportunity for Jalen Carter to come out and make a statement. Now, looking at Tyler Smith, he might be the best guard in the NFL. Zach Martin might have just passed that torch to his teammate in Tyler Smith. The Cowboys will leave him on an island a lot, which likely means we're going to see them slide to Jalen Carter's side much more. And I'd run a good number of stunts and pressures away from the slide to try and take advantage of that and force them to either live with unblocked defenders or keep an extra running back and to block, or to then try and give Jalen Carter more one-on-one matchups. When you look at the rest of the offensive line, they're really not as bad as you'd think, although I will say Dak has probably helped them to look a little bit better. Now, Terrence Steele is playing better than he has previously in his career, although the numbers don't look that good. Now, that's going to happen when you face guys like TJ Watt, Aiden Hutchinson, and Nick Bosa. When you look at his matchup against Brian Burns, and people of the podcast know that I think Brian Burns is a little overrated, Terrence Steele handled him pretty easily for the entirety of that game. So Terrence Steele is playing a little bit better, but I still think this is a game where Bryce Huff, if he's playing, should be able to get some pressures. BG and Nolan Smith, whoever lines up against Steele, they should be able to get a pressure or two here. But really, Huff, this is a game where Huff should make an impact as long as he's not sitting there getting chipped and double teamed on every single third down. But looking at some of their rookies, they have 2 rookies that Eagles fans are going to need to get to know their names, and Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe. Tyler Guyton was a Cowboys first-round pick, and I thought he's looked pretty good for a rookie. And same with Cooper Beebe. They've had their rough moments, but you can tell that they have something in them. And especially, I like the physicality that BB plays with, they have a good core on their offensive line to develop and grow into. So it is a little surprising when you see some of their rushing numbers, but then you think back to the fact that they've just been giving Zeke the ball way too much. Again, I still think this is a game where we should see the edge rushers have their fair share of wins, including Josh Sweat going against Tyler Guyton. And the more that they sit there and have to sit in a drop back passing attack, the more Fangio is going to be able to manipulate the pass protection and get some unblocked pressures as well. Now, looking at the defensive game plan, what would I do to slow this offense down? Well, number one, I would run targeted coverages at CeeDee Lamb. And anyone that's watched the podcast for some time knows that we've talked about this and different ways to do this ad nauseum with some of the other receivers that we face, like Jamar Chase during the Bengals week. But I'll go a little bit more in depth on some things I would do to take away CeeDee Lamb. So we've discussed these targeted coverages at times, right? So when the targeted receiver that you really want to take away, when they're aligned outside as their number one receiver, you end up playing cover two to that side. So you got a flat corner underneath and a deep safety over top. When that receiver moves into the slot, you usually see a little bit more quarters coverage at that point in time. But let's take it a step further, because really they're trying to get CeeDee Lamb the ball in all kinds of different ways. So when the Cowboys are in empty and CeeDee Lamb is the number two receiver on the weak side, what I would do is check to palms coverage. It's a variation of quarters, and it often plays out very much like cover two. But this is how James Bradberry got his interception against the Bills last year, where they pretty much baited Trevon Diggs into running an option route directly into James Bradberry, who was sitting there ready to jump and take advantage of that out route. So especially when you get the number two receiver on the weak side of trips, that is a huge indicator that there's going to be an option route from that receiver. Well, if there's going to be an option route, give them the option to run outside into your guy that's sitting there out there squatting, ready to jump the route. Now, if you see CeeDee Lamb as a number three receiver in trips, whether they're in empty or whether they're just in a normal trips formation, a few times during the game, what I would do is check into whip, and I've touched on this play in the past. Essentially, what's going to happen is the defensive end to that side of the field is going to drop into coverage, and oftentimes you can get essentially a pseudo double team on the number three receiver by running this coverage. When they are in 2x2 or 2x1 formations, that's when I'd be running those targeted coverages where I'm either deciding between quarters or cover two. And I will say, when CeeDee Lamb's the number three receiver in trips, I still expect them to play some of their quarters coverages, their split field safety coverages. In particular, I imagine they'll play a lot of cover 8 in this game. But I would also throw in some man coverage as well. If he's aligned at number one, I would play man coverage and I would press up on him. You'll see them convert to fade routes often when you get single high coverage and see CeeDee Lamb pressed up on. So that kind of eliminates a lot of the routes that you anticipate that they'll run when you see them in press. If he's aligned in the slot, I would use robber coverages to help take away throws over the middle. And then it allows your slot defender to play with outside leverage and funnel him into that robber safety that's helping to essentially bracket CeeDee Lamb at that point in time. But I'd also use their split safety man coverages. And I showed a good example of what happened, of how the Eagles were able to essentially get a triple team on Jamar Chase by running these split safety man coverages. So check back on the Bengals review I did if you want a little bit more breakdown of that. But at the end of the day, I would also use some exotic fronts to force one-on-ones with the other guard. If they are going to sit there and say, we're going to slide away from Tyler Smith and to Jalen Carter the whole game, come out in defensive fronts that force the offense to have to slide the protection the other way so you can get one-on-ones with Jalen Carter. You can do this with overload fronts where you see 3 defensive linemen on one side of the center. Either way, this should be a game where, as long as the Eagles play their game, aren't giving up a bunch of explosives, which really hasn't been their MO as of late, where they are making tackles and rallying to the ball, and just continuing to play the physical brand of defense that they've been playing over the past several weeks, this is going to be a game where the Cowboys are going to stall out and sputter out on their own because they're playing with the backup quarterback. They're playing with an offense that has issues outside of the quarterback on its own. They're just going to sputter and stall out on their own as long as you don't sit there and let them beat you with explosives and throw the ball over your head. So this should be a game that the defense is able to handle on their own. Now, looking at the other side of the ball, this Cowboys defense has taken a big step back. Cooper Rush went 4-1 as a starter over the past several years. A big reason for that is because the Cowboys defense was one of the better defenses in the NFL, but that's not the case this year. So let's take a look at what the Cowboys are bringing to the table on the defensive side of the ball. They're led by defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer, who is one of the most experienced coaches in the NFL. They're headlined by names like Micah Parsons and Trevon Diggs, but they're currently 31st in points per game, 26th in yards per game, 29th in yards per play, and 32nd in EPA per play. This defense will use a lot of single high coverages, whether that's cover 1 or cover 3, and then they'll use cover 2 as a changeup. They also load the box at the 5th highest rate, and they're still one of the worst run defenses in the NFL, as they're 23rd in yards per carry. The run defense often allows the offensive guard to climb to the second level quickly due to the alignment of their nose tackle. They often align their nose tackle as a shade on the center as opposed to aligning him over the guard, and this just often allows the guard to free release up to the linebackers. And when we talk about the linebackers, we're going to discuss why this really isn't that great of a strategy for the personnel that they have. Now, this team also blitzes at a higher rate than the NFL average, and that really got boosted once Micah Parsons went down. They were not really able to get pressure from anyone else on this defense. So I think Micah Parsons should be back this week, so hopefully we see that blitz rate come down. But Mike Zimmer is known for his exotic pressure packages. Jalen must be ready and confident in the protections. The coaches need to make sure they have a good game plan to be prepared for what Mike Zimmer is going to throw out. But knowing that this team and Stoutland has already faced off against Zimmer, right? When we think back to that 2017 NFC Championship game, I think they'll have a game plan put in place to be okay with the protections. Now, this defense will match 12 personnel with base, so that's something to keep in mind when game planning against them. And really what I'd say about this defense, the biggest indicator of where this defense is right now is a play from the Falcons game. There was a play where the Falcons come out in a bunch formation. You have the Cowboys are playing man coverage, and they're playing what's called lock and level, except nobody gets to different levels. The reason it's called lock and level is because everyone is just locking up the guy in front of them. It's man on man. You go wherever your guy goes. You're not switching off routes. You're not communicating and going and passing off guys based on how they release right away. You're just saying, I got this guy in front of you. When that happens, what you have to do is make sure all of your DBs are playing at different levels or they're going to run into each other. This is like basic freshman year high school level cornerback stuff. They can't figure that out right now. So you see some of these guys not even able to line up properly. And then Mike Zimmer calls it out in their post-game press conference that, listen, at some point in time, what is a coach supposed to do when the basic freshman year cornerback stuff that you're taught, these NFL pro players aren't doing? At a certain point in time, there's got to be accountability, whether that's with their coaching staff or with their players. And here's the thing, when you look at the Cowboys culture, there doesn't appear to be much accountability coming from their ownership, coming from their head coach. When you look at what Mike McCarthy said about Kellen Moore when he fired him, saying that Kellen Moore just wants to light up the scoreboard and sometimes he needs to run the damn ball. And then you look at the year after Kellen Moore leaves the Cowboys have the biggest point differential in the NFL, and then they run it at a higher rate than when Kellen Moore was there, right? That just shows a lack of accountability and just throwing another guy under the bus. That trickles down to the players. So when you got guys like Trevon Diggs not really giving effort and trying to make tackles in the run game, you have that showing up with your leaders. That trickles down to the rest of the players, and there's just a bad culture on this Cowboys team. Personally, I think the Cowboys would be better off moving on from Trevon Diggs, but that's just a personal anecdote. But when we look at some of these player matchups, we have to talk about Micah Parsons. At the time of this recording, I'm not sure if he's coming back, but it looks like he will be. We need to talk about him anyways. He's still a dominant player despite the team issues. I personally view him as the second best pass rusher in the NFL outside of Myles Garrett, and the Eagles must have a plan to stop him. I really don't want too many one-on-ones with Fred Johnson. I know he's been doing a good job holding up a lot of times on an island by himself against some of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Even still, this is a different beast, and we got to limit how many times Fred Johnson is exposed to Micah Parsons one-on-one. Now, I will say this. Because you can run the ball on this Cowboys defense, you can run at Micah Parsons as well. You can start to wear him down. And over the course of the game, that slows down a pass rusher's get off and their burst. And that's a huge part of Micah Parsons' game. He's not the most refined pass rusher, but the dude just is relentless, nonstop for sure. And if you can wear someone down, you take that away a little bit. He also has one of the fastest get-offs in the NFL. He's one of the most explosive edge rushers that the NFL's really ever seen. And you can take some of that stuff away from them if you start to wear them down with the run game. So I think that is going to be part of the Eagles' game plan, which has really been a big part of their game plan since coming from the bye week. So that's no surprise. But I'd also put him in situations where you're reading him on option games, using different play action protection plans. There's a bunch of different ways, and we've talked about it in the past, to confuse and slow down edge rushers. I'd expect that game plan to be used if Micah Parsons is playing in this game. But when you look at this defense, they've been pretty dominant in the past, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they get out quick and early and front run against bad teams. And then those bad teams can't protect against Micah Parsons when he's able to pin his ears back and get after the quarterback. If you're playing a balanced game plan and Micah has to sit there and respect the run, that's how you can start to slow this guy down. So being able to run on this team is going to be a huge part of this week's game plan. Looking at some of their other players, I really like Osa Odighizuwa. He reminds me a lot of Milton Williams. He's an undersized defensive tackle that really plays a lot bigger than what he is. He has pass rush juice as well. He's just a solid player overall. When we look at some of the players on the back end, namely Trevon Diggs, he is a solid player, but I do think he's generally overrated. He will make plays on the ball. He will get interceptions, but he will also get burned. Their other corner, DaRon Bland, looks like he is probably going to be out this week. A.J. Brown and Devontae will beat both of these guys and man coverage. I will say Trevon Diggs does a good job of baiting and sinking underneath routes as a flat defender, so you do have to pay attention to that. Like I said, he will make plays on the ball, so you do have to be aware of him, but you can also attack this guy. You don't need to be scared of going at him. He's not really wanting to mix it up in the run game, and there are questions about his lack of effort, and that is understandable when you turn on the film. I don't expect that to get any better as this Cowboys season starts to slip further and further away. Looking at their other corner that they've been throwing out there with DaRon Bland being injured for much of the year, Kalen Carson, he's, I would say, much more willing in run support, but he's just not that good of a corner at this moment in time. He will also get cooked by AJ and Devontae as well. He has one of the highest yards allowed per coverage snap, which, as we know, is a big indicator that you're giving up a lot of yards and teams are targeting you a lot. Looking at their linebacker, I touched on it a little bit earlier when we talked about how the Cowboys defense is just allowing offensive guards to get up to their linebackers. And this is a big issue for one of the guys that I like him as a player, DeMarvion Overshown, and you're going to hear his name a lot. He flies sideline to sideline. He is a very fast player, but he is also undersized. So if you can get offensive linemen to climb up to him, he struggles to get off of their blocks. He's not the most physical striking offensive lineman, and blockers in general head up. So he's a guy that I'd be looking to try and target and get my offensive lineman and run directly at him. When looking at this offensive game plan, again, you have to slow down Micah Parsons, which I think will include heavy run action and early drives, and then turn into a more aggressive drop back passing attack once they get around midfield. Once you start to see that once these drives go a little bit longer and the defensive linemen start to get a little bit more tired, that's when you also start to see the backups get subbed in. That's when you really want to start getting into your drop back passing attack at that point in time. Also, use motion and formations to remove a linebacker and put the safety and corners into the run fits. Remember, they do try and stack the box higher than the league average, but you can remove a linebacker and put in lesser players into the run fits. The Ravens did a really good job of this, and I expect the Eagles are going to do a lot of similar things that the Ravens did. I would, again, attack the B-gap bubble, specifically trying to target Overshown. Again, it's the shade versus G technique that I've talked about in the past. When you don't cover up the guards with a defensive tackle, you just allow them to climb up to those linebackers and just get free runs at them. I don't like playing a shade. I'd rather play a G technique if I was a defensive coordinator. There are pros and cons to each, but I just don't like when linebackers are able to be attacked that easily. In addition to that, I mentioned they run a lot of single high coverages, and then they mix it up with cover two. So I'd run a good amount of half field concepts, where on one side I got my concepts that I'm going to run against cover three and cover one. On the other side, I'm going to run my cover two beaters. We've seen the Eagles do this in many of the games this year. In addition to that, I said they will match 12 personnel with base. So I would get into 12 personnel, and then I would spread them out on early downs and start attacking some of those mismatches and coverage. We'll also see some staples in this Eagles offense continue to show up that we've seen week after week. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is just play smart, because as long as you don't turn the ball over, they're going to beat the Cowboys. The only way that this Cowboys team is going to beat the Eagles is fluky things like turnovers or special teams that give the Cowboys good field position or potentially directly put points on the board. This Cowboys offense isn't going to be able to keep up unless you give them short fields and let them be in striking range. So having said that, let's look at score prediction. With Micah coming back, it is a boost to the defense, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's directly involved in a play that causes a turnover. But overall, this defense has issues, so I'm not overall that concerned. This offense will struggle to move the ball as well. It's very difficult to hit explosives on this defense, and that's likely going to continue with Cooper Rush at quarterback instead of Dak Prescott. So I expect this will be a ball control offense for the Eagles, pushing for 70-plus plays on offense while probably holding the Cowboys to around 60 plays or even under that. I think this should be a game where the Eagles control the time of possession pretty handedly. And for that reason, I have a score prediction, 31-13. This should be a game where we're able to get some of the backups into the game, get some of our reserves into the game. I'd like to see Sidney Brown mix in on the defense. I'd like to see Will Shipley get some time. I'd like to see Jalix Hunt hit the field a little bit. And I think it's going to be important, knowing we have a short week going against the Commanders. I don't want Saquon Barkley having to hit 25 carries in this game just to pull this one out. This needs to be a game. They come out early. They come out strong. They come out focused. Put this team away so that we can then move on to this Commanders matchup. That is going to be a huge matchup in determining if this Eagles team is going to be able to win the division. So having said that, that is our episode for today. We will be back on Tuesday to review, hopefully, a victory podcast again. But as always, remember to like, subscribe, and spread the word. And until next time, go Birds.